Being thankful is easy when you got what you want, isn't it? At least that's the theory. It's not what I've seen as practice. It seems like the more we get what we think we want or need, or however we parse out those categories in our life, the less thankful we are for what we have, and the more impatient we are for what we don't have. Waiting is hard, isn't it? I mean, by this time next week, Dennis and Dina Moon will have waited long enough to have a new son in their family. Like, that is a bad way of starting this. I thankfully, because Jacob and Anna's wedding is next Saturday, thankfully, my in-law, or Friday, whatever. I know I'll be there. I should be there. Thankfully, my in-laws got the best end of the deal. Yeah, I am my mother-in-law's favorite son-in-law. And since there is only one son-in-law, the frustrating thing is I am not Dennis's. But oh well, you win some, you lose some. But waiting is hard, isn't it? A wedding, right? Whatever it is, waiting is hard. We've become addicted. I like the way that they talked about that. We've become addicted to the next thing. Very, very discontent with the right now. Because when we look at our right now, all we see are problems. We have this delusion in our mind that the next thing is going to be the better thing. Years ago, Dana and I have been in ministry just shy of 20 years, and we used to make this cardinal mistake early in our ministry of saying, oh, once we get past this season, then it will get better. Once we get through Easter, oh, pastors love Easter and hate Easter at the same time. Once we get through Easter, then things are going to calm down. They do not. Once we get through the summer months and all of the meetings, then we can take a break. Well, then school starts. Oh. And then it's Thanksgiving. Once we get through Thanksgiving, we didn't even ever try that because then it's Christmas. And pastors do not have a love-hate relationship with Christmas. They have a hate-hate relationship with Christmas. And so years ago, we learned to stop saying, once we get through this, then it will be better. Or then it will be different. I don't think culturally we have learned our lesson. It's actually where we find the characters of the story that was read to you earlier from 1 Samuel chapter 8. It's in that space of needing to wait. I know I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but waiting is hard, isn't it? And we're like, well, I'm not going to, we tell our Christian jokes when we start talking about waiting and patience and all of that. We're like, well, I'm not going to ask for patience because I know God's going to answer it by giving me circumstances. Guess what? You don't even have to pray for patience for circumstances to come into your life that are going to help you learn patience. And guess what? Patience is not an option for the Christian. Did you know that? We joke about it. Well, I'm just not good at it. I'm not good at waiting. I'm right there with you. But did you know waiting and patience, they're not options for the Christian. We are called to it again and again and again. And I am convinced, I said this a couple of weeks ago, let me double down on it. I am convinced that the Bible is written as a way to teach us how to wait. Everything in Scripture is about waiting. Everything. Even before sin. 7 days of creation. I don't care if you say 7 24 hours or 7 epochs or eras. It just doesn't matter. It's time that progresses. It wasn't on day one when God said, let it be, and it all was. It was day 1, let there be light. Day 2, let there be sky and sea. Day 3, let there be oceans. Day 4, let there be birds and fish. Day 5, let there be animals. And day 6, and let there be plants. I got it out of order. It doesn't matter. You can fact check me. The point of it is a span of time. There's no sin. Waiting is not a condition of sin. Waiting is a condition of life. Even there. And it was Adam and Eve who refused to wait for the knowledge that God wanted to give them. Instead, they wanted to grasp it on their own. They're going to take knowledge by taking control of it themselves and grasping the fruit on their own. And now they have knowledge of disobedience on top of whatever knowledge God was going to give them anyway. Not good knowledge, because we couldn't wait. Humanity couldn't wait. We refuse to wait. The biblical story is about waiting. We can find the Hebrew children in Egypt for 430 years waiting for redemption. We can find the Hebrew children in the wilderness waiting and wandering for 40 years, waiting for the promise. Wherever we look, we see waiting as part of the story. Throughout the Old Testament, all of the scriptures, especially the prophets, were pointing to a coming Messiah. Messiah, which means king, that they had to wait for this coming Messiah. That's what much of the prophetic witness is about this coming Messiah. But you must wait. You must wait for this. Oh, and they waited, and they wondered. And even when the prophesied Messiah was born, we had to wait 30 years between a manger and that miracle in Cana of Galilee at a wedding when Jesus turned the water into wine. We even had to wait 30 years for the Messiah, already on earth, to be the Messiah for all of creation. Waiting. This is the story. It's the long wait of the disciples of Jesus becoming actual followers of Jesus' way. Oh, discipleship, training, waiting. And of course, the long wait of Saturday's burial when Jesus' body was put into a tomb. Oh, 24 hours. Or if you time it out right, you're like, well, Jesus was really only dead about 36 hours. That spanned 3 days, late Friday, all day Saturday, early Sunday, about 36 hours. Do you know when an infinite God dies, every second is an eternity? So there's that space, that Saturday wait with the body of Christ in a tomb. And now, of course, for the church, we wait for the return of Christ. Waiting is our story. We've got to learn this. I think there are some good practices to learn patience. I'll just throw some out. I think gardening will teach you patience. Even though I'm the guy that plants the seed and goes out 2 days later and clears the dirt to see if it's germinated. Even then, I struggle. But if you're going to grow good soil, if you're going to grow decent plants, this doesn't happen the first year. It takes time. There's practices in our life. Maybe that daily, that morning time with God is an exercise in waiting to hear God. Well, I didn't really get anything out of my reading this morning. Okay, did you wait? Yeah, for like 30 seconds. Right? There's entire Christian traditions that this service is built around waiting. The old friends, the old Quaker tradition, they would wait until God was speaking in the life, not of a pastor, in the life of the congregation. And they would wait in silence until God said it was time to speak. Wait. I know it doesn't seem like this has much to do with our passage for the day, but think about this. This is a nation waiting to become a nation. They had no king, no centralized government. They were the Hebrew children. They were not the nation of Israel. They were a bunch of clans who had judges, people that were itinerant in their life, and they would go from village to village and clan to clan and bring some kind of unifying message, but there was no single nation. There was no centralized government. There was no king. There were these judges, these prophets who were supposed to speak on behalf of God, and somehow there was unity in this, but things in the land were beginning to change, and the people grew impatient. Here's the first question for us today. Where have you begun to grow impatient? Some of you have asked questions about my ongoing health. I admit it's hard for me to talk about, and it's hard for me to repeat the same things over and over again. That's why I do things very publicly like this, because even when I do it, somebody's going to come up and say, pat me on the back, say, now you can tell me. Let me tell you, the special people in my life are sitting right there. They get the inside track. You get the preacher track. Sorry. It's what it is. It's what it is. But I've had a lot of people asking, and here's what's been frustrating for us is this holding pattern, this waiting. Waiting is hard, especially when your life is on the line. I knew back in February something had shifted, and it wasn't good. And we went and saw the doctor, and the doctor said, oh, you need a heart cath because you need a new valve, but we've got to see what's going on with that valve. And so they go in and they do the heart cath. He was in and out in 4 minutes. He's like, your heart can't handle it. No valve. Your heart is way too weak. But we've got this secondary procedure. I'm going to send you to a surgeon. So I go to the surgeon here a couple of weeks ago. And we start a whole new set of drugs. Oh, that's miserable. If you've ever done drug loading, it's miserable all the time. And the second you say, well, my body's starting to normalize, I'm feeling better, they're like, great, let's double the dose. That's what we've been doing the last 2 months. So I go in there and he says, okay, we're gonna kind of plan this procedure, but we need to get your heart a little more stable, so I'll see you again on June 20th. And in my head I went, okay, good, that gets me through a wedding. Needed to get through a wedding. But June 20th, I can't breathe. I can't walk from my house to the church without needing to take a nap or drink a cup of coffee. And I don't want to wait. Because waiting for me feels like weakness, because it is weakness. And the reality is we don't know what we're waiting for. But I can tell you what we're waiting for is no good news. You been in those moments? That's my story. That's fine. That's mine. But your story is like that. I just get to do mine publicly. Sometimes I have to do mine publicly. But we all have those stories, don't we? Waiting is hard. And we see everything changing, and something needs to give right now. We cannot keep going the way we're going. Something has to give. This brings us to verse 1 of 1 Samuel chapter 8. You see, here's what's happened. The nation that isn't a nation, the people group, the Hebrew children, have been doing fairly well for themselves. I should put that in air quotes, because if you read the book of Judges, fairly well is pretty rough. There are some pretty gnarly stories in the book of Judges that any 10, 11, or 12-year-old boy is going to love a lot. One of my favorite verses is about a tent peg being driven through the temple of a man while he slept, and so that it went clear into the ground. I love that stuff. So I say they were doing well. Well, that's relative. But if you know the first part of Samuel, you know Eli was kind of a priest, maybe a judge of sorts for the nation. And Eli did Eli's part, but it wasn't great under Eli. Eli had 2 sons, and his sons were putzes. That's Yiddish. They were Hebrew, so it applies. They were putzes. They were robbing. They were delinquent. They had no scruples, and they had a punishment due them, and the punishment was death. It happened in battle, and and it's a story. But Eli had Samuel, because you see, when Samuel was born, his mother said, "I dedicate him to the Lord." And so she gave him to in a sense, to Eli, but gave him to the service of the Lord. So he was raised in this temple, kind of temple setting. Oh, it was very different than what we think of in temple. This is early on, but he was raised in this, raised by Eli, raised to hear the voice of God, raised to be a prophet. In a sense, Samuel became what Eli's sons were not. But our verse starts with Samuel being old. It says, "Now Samuel became old." And I love how it says that, because have you looked in the mirror and gone, what happened? Like, when did this happen? The previous verse, he was not old. The next verse, he's old. Yesterday morning, I wasn't old. I got up this morning, I'm old. What happened? Right? It happens sometimes like that. And here's what we discover. That actually Samuel's own children took after Eli's children. They were delinquent. You heard it. They were robbing from the people. They weren't acting as just judges. They were bad eggs in that sense. But Eli had Samuel. Who did Samuel have? Nobody. Here are these people. Everything's changing. Everything's changing. Samuel's getting old. We recognize it. He's getting old. We need a succession plan. His sons, they're morons. That's not going to work. He's not raising anybody. He didn't have a mother drop a baby off. Don't ever do that, please. I guarantee you will not like how I raise your kid. Promise you that. But they're looking at it. The nation are looking at it going, what now? What now? So they said, we need a king like the other nations. They couldn't wait. Sometimes these things happen in our life where it seems like we have to do something now. And sometimes when we jump the gun, we make everything worse. So this sermon is about waiting, but it's also about the king you choose is the slave you'll be. If the king you've chosen is all of tomorrow's blessings, our addiction to tomorrow, our addiction to the next thing, you will be a slave to that, and you will die miserable. The king you choose is the slave you will be. And did you know you don't have a choice? Well, I just choose not to serve anybody or anything. I love what Bob Dylan said. I played that song once here. Maybe did we sing it? We should sing it. Switchfoot, Bob Dylan. You got to serve somebody. Now, it may be the devil and it may be the Lord, but you got to serve somebody. This is what it boils down to. The king you choose is the slave you will be. The king that is Christ, we become slaves to love, which is a kind of liberty. Every other king, we become slaves. It was right there in our passage. Remember, Samuel was warning them. He said, he's going to take your young men. He's going to draft them to his army. He's going to take the women. They're going to be part of the industry, Rosie the Riveter in the 4th century BC. Right? That's right there. He's going to take your crops, your grains. He's going to turn all of this stuff into implements of war. He's going to take land so that in treaties with other nations, he can gift them different things. And the one that gets me is he's going to take 1/10 of your crops, 1/10 of your livestock. He's going to take a tenth. In Bible terms, that's code for worship. It's a tithe. That's what tithe means. It means tenth. It's code for worship. He's going to take your worship. This is what it says. And the people, I said, no. We want this. We want this. We need it. We have no other plan. We need it. They couldn't wait. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of get their position. Because we have those things in our life. We just can't wait. And so sometimes we make a decision rather than waiting for the right decision. This brings us right back to our story with a question of what are you waiting for, number one, and number two, what's king in your life? What's controlling your life? Sometimes what you're waiting for is what's controlling your life. Usually they go together. And I think there's a warning for us in this passage about becoming impatient with God's desires for our life. Now, there's my setup. Here's what I discovered this week. Every biblical teacher, sermon, Sunday school literature, class I've sat through has lied to me about this text. They may not have lied, but they got it wrong. In fact, I preached this text about 3 years ago. We follow the lectionary roughly. And so this text was about 3 years ago. The lectionary runs on a 3-year calendar. And I went back. Guess what? I lied to you. Here's what I told you, and here's what I think you've been told your whole life. I can almost guarantee it. Is that what this story is about is that God did not want them to have a king. God wanted them to trust Him so much that they didn't need a centralized, localized power because a king's going to do bad things to you. But God says, I love you, and so you don't need a king. You just need to trust me more. And I've always heard this passage preached with that understanding, that God was saying, no king for you. Am I alone? Has anyone else heard this passage or the idea that God did not want Israel to have a king and thought, well, yeah, go to this passage and you're like, well, see, obviously. Can I tell you, it's dead wrong. How do I know that? Well, I made the silly mistake of reading the Bible. And turns out in Deuteronomy, you know, that precedes 1 Samuel, not just in your Bible, but chronologically. The children of Israel are on the backside of the desert. They have wandered 40 years, and none of them had passed through the Red Sea except for Moses and Joshua and Caleb. And so they didn't remember all of the stuff that God did in the early days. So Moses is preaching 2 sermons to remind them of the law and the covenants before they enter the land of promise. They're about to cross the Jordan. That's what Deuteronomy is. Deutero, 2. Nomos means words. 2 words, 2 sermons. So as Moses is preaching, here's what he says in Deuteronomy 17. I won't read the whole passage. You can go back and check it later. But beginning with verse 14, it says, now when you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the other nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you, whom your Lord God will choose. Did you hear it? You may indeed set a king over you, whom your Lord God will choose. Here's what's happening, is the nation finds itself in a time of transition. Everything's changing. Samuel's old. His kids are not doing good. Who's going to be in charge? Where are we going to get leadership? Where are we going to get unanimity? Where are we going to get the oracles of God? Okay, it's time for a king. God says, not quite yet. Not quite yet. Nope, we want it anyway. So what happens at the end of 1 Samuel chapter 8? Listen to this. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey their voice and make them a king. Not, I will choose a king, but make them a king. And then the story proceeds. You can go into 9 and 10 and you get the details of it. Samuel finds this dude. He's tall. He's good looking. He looked a lot like me. He was well built. He had military exploits under his belt. He looked like the king. You know how some people look like a president or look like a prime minister. And then there's other people who don't look the part. Boris Johnson. Like, I never figured that one out. Comb your hair, at least. But there are people that look the part. Saul looked the part. So Samuel made him a king. Flash forward several chapters. And Samuel now is at the house of Jesse, who has a bunch of sons. And he sees a son that, has the makings of a king. He looks good, he's tall, he's vigorous, he's all this stuff. And God says to Samuel, no, on down the road, no. And Samuel goes through the whole list, and he's like, so what now? And God says, there's one more. And so Samuel says, do you have another son? And Jesse says, well, yeah, the Katan. Katan, I like that word. You know what that's a Hebrew word. It means runt. The Katan. He's out in the field keeping sheep. Call him in. As soon as he called in, God said, that's the king I choose. Let me give you a theory that I have, and it will help make the point. The point stands even if my theory is wrong, but it will help make the point. I have a theory that David was always the king after God's own heart. That David was always God's plan for Israel. That the first king of Israel, that was to anticipate the eternal king of Israel, the Christ. That first king was always supposed to be David, because that was the king whom God chose. But they grew impatient. They refused to wait. And they got the one who looked the part and ended up with broken promises, ended up with a broken nation, ended up with a broken monarchy. Think about David's life. If Saul had not been king before David was king, he probably wouldn't have married Milcah, Saul's daughter, who then became a thorn in his side, who actually undermined him in his work, who mocked him when he danced before the Ark of the Covenant. He would not have had the song sung about him. Well, Saul has killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands. There would have been no competition. He wouldn't have been having to try to measure up to what a monarchy should be like. Maybe the brokenness of his own family would have been completely different. All of these parts about David's life, on the run from Saul, hiding in caves, pretending to be a madman in the city of Ziklag. None of that would have happened. Maybe the brokenness of David that did affect the nation wouldn't have been there. David's still responsible for his choices and his decisions. But you see, when we refuse to wait for God's promises, there are times when God actually gives us what we want, and we discover we should have waited. We should have waited. So, let me give you just a few application points. First of all, this whole text hinges upon a change in the nation. Samuel's old, and there's no one there's no one to fill in the gaps after him. To some of you old people, some of whom will outlive me, quit being jerks. Quit being nasty, mean, grumpy old hags. What's the male version of hag? I don't know. Whatever that is, quit it. Old age is a privilege. And it's a privilege that not a lot of people, that not everyone gets. Treat your old age like a privilege. I know everything's changing. I know it. And I know the best way forward is probably for us to back up 50 years, or so I've been told, although I think it's bunk. I know the world is moving fast, but some of our impatience culturally is because of you. Oh, I know. Kids aren't supposed to say bad things to their elders. But sometimes we see the changes and we freak out. Your old age should teach you to trust in God. And your old age should give you the credibility to teach those of us that haven't learned the lesson as long as you have, how to navigate those waters. I will say at this point in my life, I have no patience, room, or tolerance for cranky old people. So if that's you, I'm done. Not even going to be kind about it. Because part of what we inherit is the patience of your trust in God. May we inherit something. So there's something practical. I'll start with the top and work down. Here's the second thing, very practical thing. Learn to be patient. You're like, well, I don't know how to learn to be patient. Well, quit being impatient. Like, the only way to learn patience is to do hard things. And sometimes you don't even have to do hard things. Sometimes they find you. Practice patience. This one's to me. When I walk into a doctor's office and they don't treat me like the golden child, oh, Mr. Jewett, come back. Can I make a latte for you and rub your feet while you wait for the doctor? Or when the doctor says to me, well, Jeff, you do know there are some things that are expected to change as we age. Maybe not punch him, right? I didn't punch the doctor. I thought about it. Right? But these are the moments. You're like, well, I'm not going to pray for patience because God will give me patience. If you're not actively growing in your patience, you are actively denying the voice of God. Oof. So, learn patience by ceasing or working at becoming impatient. Quit being so impatient. And you're like, but you don't know the things. I know. Start with the little things. Start with the little things. The doctor's office. The drive-through lane at the fast food. The person in front of you at Quick Trip. Because Quick Trip have the fastest cash registers in the world. And I still get behind that one dude who holds them all up. All of them while we check the numbers for Powerball for the last year. Right? So, maybe look at your life and say, okay, there's a place for me to learn patience. Quit being a grumpy old badger. Start being patient. Learn to trust God. You who have taught us to do our devotions, to listen for the voice of God, trust God to speak. As a pastor, can I tell you, I hate this part. Because I see a declining church, locally, globally. And everything in me says, we got to do something, we got to do something, we have got to do something. What if it's not time for a king? I love the line, one of my favorite mystics, I love the line, she wrote it in the mid-century, it's visions of love, and she says, in the end, she says, all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, all shall be well. I've not found one person who believes that, certainly not in the church. When I've asked people what their view of the future is, all of them groan. Ugh. I have not found one person who looks to the future and says, you know what? God's got this. Not one. Not one. And I've been asking in the church. Not one. So learn to trust. Quit being an old badger. Learn patience by ceasing to be impatient. Maybe plant a garden. That's a good practice. It's helped me. Learn to trust. This means simply that you're going to act as if God is telling the truth. Okay? God, there's your promises. I'm going to act as if you're telling the truth. So quit being an old badger. Learn to be patient by quitting being impatient. Learn to trust by acting as if God is actually telling the truth. And then finally, learn faithfulness. Not faith like some kind of feeling. I can't stop that feeling deep inside of me. We've got to, ooga chaka, right? We have got to, it's a great song. Good wedding song, by the way. We have got to quit. We have got to quit thinking that faith is a feeling. Faith is an action. When we stand with a couple getting married and they exchange their rings, they say, with this ring I thee wed. We may change it a little bit. With this ring I thee wed as a pledge of my fidelity. Faithfulness. Faithfulness. It's not a pledge to feel a certain way all the time. I mean, there's days when our spouses are the Antichrist. I was informed, this is not in my notes, I was informed, this is more than you ever wanted to know about your pastor. I was informed as I was getting ready to come up on the platform that I go to bed early on Saturdays, that my closed bedroom door to keep everyone else out, when Dana finally came in to go to bed, she thought twice about it because apparently I had perfumed the room. Right? There are moments when you don't feel the faithfulness of marriage. But this is the relationship with God. Faithfulness is not a feeling. It's those small things. My poor wife is like, he just told that story. You see, faithfulness is the practice of taking care of the things in front of you. Faith is the function of right now. Faith is the function of right now, so that we may have a secure hope in what God has promised for tomorrow. Faith is the function of right now. I love that line from the song, It Is Well With My Soul. And Lord, haste the day when faith shall be sight. Faith is right now. It's what moves us, and we've got to be faithful in the little things in our life, the little moments in our life, because little faithfulnesses are evidence of a big faith. And so, here's a very practical message for us. Everything's changing in Israel. Everything's changing in Derby. Everything's changing in the world. Everything's changing, and it's happening fast. Okay, old people, you can gripe about it. And your gripe is going to make things worse. So knock it off. It's the first thing. Number two, I wish I could have alliterated this. It would have helped so much. But I just wanted to call you all grumpy badgers. So number one, quit it. Learn patience. Quit being impatient. Number two, quit it. Quit being impatient. Quit it. Number three, learn to trust. Trust that God is going to keep His word. Quit not believing God. Quit it. First point, quit it. Second point, quit it. Third point, quit it. Learn faithfulness. Quit being unfaithful in the little things. Quit it. So here it is. Patience and waiting for God, waiting for the right king, waiting for what God chooses for you, rather than choosing our king for ourselves, boils down to these four principles, all of which we can consolidate into one thing. Quit it. Wait, listen, and God will move.